Welcome to today's deep dive. We're jumping straight into a pretty massive stack of research today.
We really are. It's a lot to get through.
Yeah, we've got internal studies from Gallup, some really interesting guidelines from UW-Madison's HR department, a 10-year study from the Harvard Business Review, and the data behind Google's famous Project Aristotle.
Oh, that Google study is just fascinating.
It is, and our mission for you listening today is, well, it's singular. We are unpacking the actual mechanics of supervising a team in this modern hybrid world without crossing that dreaded line into micromanaging.
Which is such a fine line to walk.
Exactly. How do you lead effectively and actually ensure high output when you literally cannot physically see the people you're leading?
The stakes for figuring this out are just incredibly high right now. For anyone listening, there is a very strong probability you've experienced this tension firsthand.
Oh, for sure.
Because current data shows that 59% of employees have worked for a micromanager at some point in their careers.
Wait, almost 60%?
Yeah, almost 60%. It is a nearly universal professional experience at this point.
That is wild. And when you look at the fallout in the data, it's honestly devastating. We're talking about a 68% drop in morale.
Right.
And a 55% drop in actual productivity among those workers.
Just massive numbers.
I mean, more than half of a team's potential output just vaporizes because the environment feels suffocating.
And we really have to ground those numbers in harsh business reality. This isn't just about employees like venting about a frustrating boss over coffee.
Right, it's not just a culture problem.
Exactly. Failing to trust your team is literally draining the company's bank account. Micromanagement consistently ranks as a top 3 driver of employee resignations.
Which is incredibly expensive.
Oh, hugely. When you factor in that replacing a knowledge worker costs roughly 33% of their annual salary.
Wow.
Just in lost productivity, recruitment, and onboarding. You realize that hovering over your team is actually one of the most expensive systemic errors an organization can make.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we know micromanaging is expensive, right? And we know everyone absolutely hates experiencing it.
Nobody likes it.
But to actually fix the dynamic, we need to understand how the behavior has, well, mutated. The traditional image of a manager, walking the floor with a clipboard.
Looking over your shoulder?
Yeah, that just doesn't apply to a workforce that operates largely on Slack and Zoom now.
The landscape is fundamentally fractured. I mean, 60% of U.S. employees currently want hybrid work setups.
Okay.
And only 10% want to be fully on site. So suddenly, managers are dealing with this severe loss of physical visibility. They literally can't manage by walking around anymore.
And that has to be terrifying for some of them.
Well, it induces a very real psychological panic for leadership. The pressure from the executive level to prove that remote teams are actually working pushes middle managers to demonstrate control in the only environment they have left, which is the digital one. And the resulting data is really alarming. 70% of leaders now admit they are completely comfortable using invasive digital monitoring tools on their teams.
Okay, when you say invasive, we're talking about like the enterprise software suites that handle screen recording and keystroke tracking, right?
Yes, exactly that.
I totally understand the ick factor of that from a privacy standpoint, but let me play devil's advocate for just a second here.
Go for it.
If I'm paying someone for 40 hours of work and I can't physically see them at a desk,
Right.
isn't measuring their keystrokes or mouse movements just a logical, operational way to ensure the company is getting what it paid for? I mean, shouldn't a manager verify output?
What's fascinating here is that the human brain absolutely rejects that specific kind of surveillance on a neurological level.
Really? Neurologically?
Yes, it entirely backfires. When an employee knows their keystrokes are being logged, it triggers a low-grade threat response in the parasympathetic nervous system.
Like a fight or flight kind of thing.
Exactly. So the brain shifts out of its executive function.
Which is where the good stuff is, right?
That's where creativity, complex problem solving, and strategic thinking live. It shifts out of that and into pure self-preservation.
Wow.
So you don't actually get more productive employees. You just get employees who are exceptionally good at jiggling their mouse to look busy.
Just gaming the system.
Totally. It destroys the foundational trust required for knowledge work, which completely warps the team culture.
Which perfectly sets up the Gallup polling data we have in our stack today, because they actually developed a diagnostic framework to determine if a team culture has been warped by this kind of surveillance.
Yeah, it's a brilliant framework.
They use a one-question test to spot a micromanager's footprint, essentially.
The question is simply, is your team customer obsessed or are they boss obsessed?
Boss-obsessed. That's a great term.
In a boss-obsessed environment, the actual end user, the client, or even the quality of the product essentially ceases to matter.
Because everyone is just looking upwards.
Right. The primary directive of every employee is just to appease the manager's anxiety. Progress grinds to a halt because every minor decision has to be routed through a single bottleneck.
The psychological mechanics of that are so fascinating to me. The research shows employees will deliberately submit less than best work just because they know it fits the manager's highly specific, idiosyncratic tastes.
Exactly.
So if I'm hyper-focusing on whether my boss will prefer bullet points or a numbered list in my email draft,
Which is trivial.
completely trivial, but I'm literally not utilizing that brain power to think about the customer's needs. It's fundamentally an attention economy problem, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is. You have a finite amount of cognitive bandwidth every day.
Right.
If 70% of that bandwidth is spent managing a supervisor's insecurity or, trying to leave the correct digital footprint to satisfy a tracking algorithm,
You've got nothing left.
you have virtually nothing left for deep, meaningful work. And we see this disconnect clearly in corporate strategy versus reality. Well, 44% of companies rank innovation as a top priority. They desperately want their teams to think outside the box.
But they're spying on them.
Exactly. Constant digital surveillance forces employees to become incredibly risk-averse.
You cannot innovate if you are terrified of making a mistake on camera.
You just can't.
Innovation requires a high tolerance for messy, unmeasurable thinking time. A keystroke tracker just codes staring at the ceiling and solving a complex problem as, idle time.
It kills new ideas entirely.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to stick their neck out with a radical new solution if their performance review is tied to how constantly their fingers were moving across a keyboard.
So if the fallout is this universally disastrous,
I bet it is.
killing morale, blocking innovation, triggering expensive resignations, we really have to ask why smart, highly paid managers continue to do it.
It's a great question.
To solve the problem, we have to move past the caricature of the terrible boss and kind of empathize with the root cause of the behavior.
And empathy is crucial here because the vast majority of managers actually have incredibly good intentions.
They aren't trying to be villains.
No, not at all. They are highly invested in the team's success. They want to ensure high-quality output. They want to prevent their team from making painful public mistakes.
Yeah.
And they want to impart the specific expertise that earned them the leadership role in the first place. But alternatively, you have the other end of the spectrum too.
The managers who simply lack training.
Right. And they become what the data calls AWOL managers.
AWOL managers, meaning managers who are absent right up until the exact moment a project is due.
Yes. Gallup identifies this specific behavior as fly-in and fly-out micromanagement.
I love that phrase.
The untrained supervisor basically avoids the day-to-day friction of managing people, but then swoops in at the 11th hour on an email chain or a final review call.
Just causing chaos.
Total chaos. They immediately start pointing out perceived errors and demanding sweeping changes, doing so without possessing any of the crucial context the team has gathered over the previous month of actual work.
It's like what do they call it? A seagull manager.
A seagull manager, exactly.
Right, where they just fly in, make a ton of noise, drop a mess all over your project, and then abruptly fly away.
That is the perfect visualization of it.
Yeah.
It's massively disruptive, not because they're trying to be malicious, but because they're operating on incomplete information and terrible timing.
It's like a movie director who skips 3 weeks of rehearsal, walks onto the stage on opening night, and suddenly tries to change the lead actor's blocking.
Yes, and the fundamental fix for both the overbearing tracker and the absent fly-in manager requires a really systemic mindset shift.
Okay, what is this shift?
The entire supervisory model has to transition from bossing to coaching.
Bossing to coaching.
Right. Bossing is inherently transactional. It fixates on catching mistakes and enforcing a rigid hierarchy. Coaching, on the other hand, is relational.
Meaning it's more about the connection.
Exactly. It provides ongoing support, extends trust, and relies on collaborative problem solving.
We need to look at the practical blueprint for actually executing that shift. Because telling a stressed middle manager to, just be a coach is incredibly unhelpful without tactical steps.
Very true.
And the research points to a very specific first pillar here. Organizations must completely stop tracking hours and pivot entirely to managing outcomes.
Yes.
Astonishingly, the data shows that 41% of organizations still rely on total hours worked as their primary productivity metric.
Which is crazy. Applying an hours-based metric to a modern knowledge worker operating a hybrid setup is just an anachronism at this point.
It doesn't fit.
It clashes entirely with the core value proposition of remote work, which is flexibility. When a team manages outcomes, the input of hours becomes essentially irrelevant.
Right.
It should matter if an employee took a 2-hour walk in the middle of a Tuesday, provided the final project was delivered brilliantly and hit the deadline.
Now, managing outcomes sounds like the perfect solution on paper, but I have to push back a bit on the reality of implementing it.
Sure.
How do we ensure we don't just replace micromanaging a human being with, like, micromanaging a software dashboard?
Ah, that is the trap.
Because we all use project management tools, right?
Okay.
Asana, ClickUp, Trello. If a manager is just sitting there refreshing an Asana board 50 times a day...
And demanding real-time status updates in the comments.
Exactly. At that point, the technology has literally just become a digital clipboard.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, technology alone never solves a management crisis.
Never.
Those platforms are necessary infrastructure. They are designed to create a single source of truth, so managers have real-time visibility into bottlenecks without having to interrupt an employee's deep work state. But a tool is completely useless without the proper human protocols dictating how it's actually used.
Which brings us to the human layer and the incredibly illuminating guidelines published by UW-Madison's Human Resources Department.
They did fantastic work on this.
They really emphasize that the human rules of engagement are what actually determine if a hybrid team thrives or suffocates. One of their primary recommendations is explicitly defining when to use synchronous channels versus asynchronous updates.
Because a team cannot operate efficiently if half the group treats every single Slack message as a 5-alarm fire that requires an instant response.
Right, dropping whatever they're doing.
While the other half treats it like an email you can check tomorrow. UW-Madison strongly recommends documenting these expectations in a shared team charter.
It functions a lot like establishing the traffic laws before you put any cars on the road.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Like red lights and yield signs only prevent accidents if every single driver agrees on what they mean beforehand. So you sit down as a team and decide what level of urgency warrants a live Microsoft Teams call.
Yes.
What can just be a Friday asynchronous update on a Trello card. It's like a prenuptial agreement for your working relationship. You build the framework while everyone is calm before the stress of a quarter-end deadline hits.
Establishing those boundaries is critical. And the UW-Madison HR guidelines take it a step further by centering a concept called social presence.
Social presence. Unpack that for us.
So in a physical office, you naturally gather context about your team just by being around them. You see who looks exhausted, who is energized, who is clearly frustrated.
You can read the room.
Exactly. In a virtual space, the work becomes dangerously transactional. Centering social presence means intentionally checking in on how people are doing before you dive into what they are doing.
The data on what happens when you ignore social presence is sobering, particularly regarding inclusive communication.
It's a huge issue.
Without intentional facilitation, the virtual environment naturally marginalizes certain voices. Nearly half of female business leaders report struggling to speak up in virtual meetings. Half. And 20% feel outright overlooked or dismissed on video calls. The very tools meant to connect hybrid teams actually silence a massive portion of the talent pool if the manager isn't actively managing the room's dynamic.
Ben Richardson from Acuity Training outlines some really excellent tactical solutions for this exact problem.
What does he suggest?
Well, a manager has to democratize the virtual room. You implement things like round-robin check-ins, where every single participant is explicitly given the floor to share their perspective.
So no one has to fight to jump in.
Right. It completely removes the need to aggressively interject.
Yeah.
And even more effectively, you assign specific meeting roles. You designate a question raiser or a skeptic for a specific project review.
Assigning the role of the skeptic is just brilliant structural design.
It really works.
It completely removes the social friction and anxiety of dissenting. If your assigned job for the next 30 minutes is to poke holes in the marketing plan, nobody thinks you are being a difficult colleague.
You're just doing your job.
You are just executing your role. It normalizes critical feedback.
But here's the thing. We can build the perfect communication charter and implement the sleekest project management software on the market to manage outcomes. But the true stress test for any manager isn't when things are running smoothly.
Of course not.
The true test of whether you are a coach or a micromanager is how you react when an employee genuinely struggles, misses a deadline, or puts an outcome in jeopardy.
How do you step in and offer support without immediately grabbing the steering wheel and reverting to that fly-in behavior?
Exactly.
The Harvard Business Review published a landmark 10-year study analyzing exactly this dynamic, the actual mechanics of helping in the workplace.
It's a fascinating study. They discovered that unwanted or poorly timed help is actively destructive to team performance,
Even if the manager means well.
even if they mean well. From a decade of observation, they developed 3 golden rules of helping.
Let's hear them.
Rule number 1, step in only when the team is actually engaged and ready to receive assistance.
Ready to receive it.
Right. If a manager forces their intervention before the employee has actually wrestled with the problem, it severely undermines the employee's autonomy and signals a lack of trust in their capability.
You have to let them grapple with the friction. The manager basically has to wait for the opening rather than rushing in at the very first sign of a slowdown.
Precisely. Rule number 2 dictates that when a manager finally does step in, they must fiercely clarify their role.
Meaning they have to state their intentions?
Yes. The manager must make it explicitly known that they are there to assist, provide resources, and clear organizational obstacles. They are not there to judge, evaluate, or take over the execution of the task.
Which brings us back to our earlier driving analogy. If you are in the passenger seat, you are just reading the map and pointing out upcoming potholes.
Right.
You do not reach over and grab the steering wheel.
You never grab the wheel.
Yeah.
And then rule number 3 requires the manager to align the rhythm of their involvement to the employee's specific needs.
Oh, so.
While a junior employee might genuinely need an intensive hour-long whiteboard session to untangle a coding problem,
Sure.
but a senior engineer might just need the manager to make a 5-minute phone call to clear some red tape with the legal department.
It's contextual.
Exactly. The coach adjusts to the player's rhythm. The player does not contort to fit the coach's preferred management style.
It completely flips the traditional hierarchy. The manager essentially works to optimize the employee's process. And all of these protocols, the charter, the careful interventions, the focus on outcomes,
Yeah.
they ultimately serve one massive overarching goal. Which brings us to arguably the most famous piece of organizational research in the modern era, Google's Project Aristotle.
Oh, this is the gold standard of team research.
Yeah.
Google spent years analyzing hundreds of their own internal teams, basically searching for the algorithmic magic formula that created high performance.
They looked at everything.
Everything. They looked at educational backgrounds, the mix of introverts and extroverts, technical proficiency.
And what did they find?
The data revealed that team composition actually mattered very little compared to one single overwhelming predictor of success:
Psychological safety.
psychological safety.
For those who might not know, psychological safety is essentially the foundational belief that you will not be punished, humiliated, or retaliated against for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or, for admitting mistakes.
Right. And when a team achieves high psychological safety, the internal metrics just transform completely.
Well, numbers are wild.
The Project Aristotle data shows that work-related stress drops by 74%.
Wow.
Collaboration across the team improves by 57%. Actual productivity and output boost by 50%.
Half? That's a 50% boost.
And crucially, employees experience 40% less burnout.
So what does this all mean? How does a manager operating through a webcam actually build that psychological safety? Harvard's Amy Edmondson, who pretty much pioneered the modern academic research on this concept, argues that it isn't a policy you can just mandate.
No, you can't just put it in a memo.
It's a fragile state maintained by leadership behavior, and the absolute most effective tool a leader has to build it is modeling vulnerability.
Which is hard for a lot of leaders.
Yeah.
Vulnerability in a corporate setting means explicitly admitting uncertainty. Yeah. It requires a manager to look at their team on a Zoom call and say, I actually don't know the answer to this problem. What is our best path forward?
That's terrifying for some people.
It runs entirely counter to traditional industrial-era corporate culture, where the boss is expected to constantly project infallible authority.
But it turns out that admitting you don't know the answer is actually the ultimate leadership flex. It proves to the team that you value truth and collaborative problem-solving over protecting your own ego.
Perfectly said.
When a leader signals that it's safe to not know everything, they make it safe for the team to experiment, to take calculated risks, and to engage in deep work without constantly looking over their shoulder for approval.
The transition basically requires abandoning the illusion of control. When you actually trust your team, you don't need to count their keystrokes.
Exactly. So to bring all of this together for you, the listener, navigating this highly complex hybrid landscape, here's the cheat sheet synthesized from our entire stack of sources today.
Let's hear it.
First, you have to discard activity trackers and hours counted. Swap them out entirely for rigorous outcome management.
Yep.
Second, stop hovering and start building clear, explicit communication protocols documented in a shared team charter.
Crucial step.
Third, when your people hit a wall, do not grab the wheel. Step in only to clear the specific obstacles blocking their path.
Be the passenger.
Be the passenger. And finally, prioritize psychological safety above all else, which really begins with your own willingness to be vulnerable. You're no longer a gatekeeper, right? Your job is to be a path clearer.
It is a really demanding shift in perspective, but the data proves it is the only sustainable way to run a modern organization.
It absolutely is. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you analyze your own team's dynamics.
Always a good idea.
We spent a lot of time today discussing how to leverage technology to track outcomes rather than keystrokes, right?
Yeah.
And how to use human protocols to inject empathy back into the workflow. But look at the horizon. What happens over the next 5 years when artificial intelligence tools become advanced enough to actually do the initial evaluations of an employee's output?
Oh, that's a massive question.
Will AI simply become the ultimate invisible micromanager, scrutinizing and grading every single draft, code commit, or email we produce with relentless precision?
It could easily go that way.
Or will AI finally free human supervisors from the administrative burden of monitoring altogether, allowing managers to purely focus on coaching, empathy, and building the psychological safety that algorithms can never replicate?
That's the hope.
The tools are changing, but the core question of trust remains. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, lead with trust, and we'll catch you next time.